Hey guys, so it's chapter 10, a democratic revolution, 1800 to 1844. We'll look at why there was a rise in democracy, meaning more people were able to vote through presidential elections. We'll start with the presidential election of 1824 and why it was duped the corrupt bargain of 1824. We'll move on and talk about the presidential election of 1828 and the new two-party system that forms from there. We'll move on and discuss President Andrew Jackson in detail. Three major events: the nullification crisis, the Second Bank of the U.S., and the Indian Removal Act. We'll then move on and talk about another political party that gave prominence to U.S. democracy here, called the Whigs, and how they call Andrew Jackson King Andrew I. This is through the presidential election of 1836. We'll look at the Panic of 1837, and then the final presidential election that we'll look at here is 1840, which was dubbed the Log Cabin and Horse Cider Campaign. So right off the top, why were more people able to vote? Well, it was simple. People realized that by limiting suffrage, that was a form of tyranny. And the United States did not want to see itself as a tyrannical nation. So they started to drop property requirements for people to be able to vote. States revised their constitution so as to give just about all white men the right to vote. And political parties gave the common man a voice, a choice to be able to choose what political party they could belong to and what political party they will support. Some of the effects: the common man became politicians and held political office. There was increase in voter turnaround. There was a lot of dialogue regarding politics, and there was also these meetings of political leaders where they would pick their candidate that became known as caucus. And the negative impact of this, we have the spoils system, which is where elected officials then elected their friends to political office. So these candidates accepted bribes from investors in exchange for laws that favored their product as well. So one of the major drawbacks was this spoils system, which was a form of corruption. So let's start off with the first presidential election, the corrupt bargain of 1824. We have four candidates here, and you can see them here. They're color-coded. They're all Republicans. The two that we're going to focus on is John Quincy Adams in pink and Andrew Jackson in red. So the main issue of the 1824 presidential campaign was Henry Clay's, who was one of the candidates, American system. Basically, all this was a system to create more transportation, public works, and improve internal roads. Now, Jackson was the only candidate of the four who came from humble beginnings, who was poor. In the presidential election here, no one candidate received the majority of electoral votes. As such, the House of Representatives needed to decide who was going to become president. Henry Clay was the Speaker of the House, and he did not like Andrew Jackson at all. So Henry Clay influenced the House of Representatives to elect John Quincy Adams as president. In exchange, John Quincy Adams elected Henry Clay as Secretary of State. The importance of that is that every person who had been Secretary of State up until that point had become president. So Henry Clay felt that by becoming Secretary of State, he would eventually become president. And because of that, because of this agreement between Henry Clay and John Quincy Adams, the presidential election of 1824 becomes known as the corrupt bargain of 1824. Now, to give you a little bit more of a view here, you notice we have the four candidates, the electoral votes that they got, the popular votes, and then the popular percentage. The Constitution states that the candidate with the majority, meaning 50.1% or more of electoral votes, will become president. But none of them got the majority of votes. This is why it had to go to the House of Representatives. And the House of Representatives elected John Quincy Adams. Now, you're going to look at this chart over and over again. So we're looking at all these presidential elections. We started in 1824, and look at how few people actually voted. The colors represent the different political parties. So again, in 1824, all four candidates were Republicans. And we'll see that we also have a new Democratic Party and a new political party that becomes known as Whigs. But just look at the pie chart and see how, as the elections move on, there's more voter participation. And we'll look at that a little bit more. So John Quincy Adams becomes president. He serves from 1824 to 1828. His policies, he favored tariffs and the bank, which were both opposed by the South, and also Henry Clay's American system, which was opposed by the North. Now, the corrupt bargain damaged John Quincy Adams' image and policies. The North believed that each state should fund their own roads, and this is why they were against Clay's American system. Adams' presidency, unfortunately, was stained by the corrupt bargain and the fact that he was out of tune with the people. In a time where the common man was eager to have a voice, John Quincy Adams felt that the common man shouldn't have a voice because they did not know how to rule. So, John Quincy Adams goes down in history as one of the worst presidents that the United States has ever had. So let's move on. 4 years later, we have a new presidential election in 1828. This is known as a two-party system. In the 1824, there were all Republicans. Now we have a new political party, the Democrats. So the Democrats appealed to the common man. Jackson was the leader of the Democrats. You see this in yellow here, because again, he was born poor, and he was hailed as a self-man-made, that through hard times, he was able to climb the political ladder to the highest position in the country, become president of the United States. Jackson was able to win because he appealed to the southern planters. Jackson was born in the South, but also to northern farmers and the artisans. And not only that, we see that in 1828, we have totally new elections, because we see mass meetings, parades, barbecues, and the candidates even started to kiss babies to gain the support of the people. So in 1828, notice the yellow, Andrew Jackson wins pretty convincingly. The electoral votes here, he gets the majority of the votes, and also in the popular votes. So the 1828 presidential campaign distinguished itself because candidates started to visit the common people. This is known as new politics. Candidates would talk to ordinary citizens to win their votes. Ordinary citizens felt that now their voice were being heard, and that the candidates would take their interests into consideration. And that was a form of equality. Here's another political cartoon that shows politics talking to the common man, hearing them out so that they could win their support. And during election dates, we see the elections here, the candidates voting for the people voting for the candidates that went and talked to them. And one of the ways that the candidates appealed to the people was by offering them drinks. And these political rallies become social events where people were able to talk to each other and socialize. So we see that political campaigns start to take the shape of modern politics. And again, in 1828, Andrew Jackson defeated John Quincy Adams. And notice in 1828, more than double the people voted in 1828 than those in 1824. So we see the expansion of democracy. All white men, whether they own property or not, were eligible to vote. Now, during President Andrew Jackson's inaugural address, as he was in the White House giving his inaugural address, the common man wanted to hear him out. So they actually climbed a fence through the White House to hear Andrew Jackson give his inaugural address. This becomes known as King Mob. And there was a fear that King Mob was going to spread. And King Mob was characterized by unskilled ordinary people ill to run the country, because Andrew Jackson was the first president to have been elected president without having a college degree. So there he is, Andrew Jackson. When he comes to power, he practiced the spoil system also. Even though he complained that John Quincy Adams and Henry Clay had a corrupt bargain, he pretty much did the same thing. Jackson believed that running the government was a simple job, that men with limited education and experience could do a job properly. So what he did was he rewarded his supporters with political offices. Jackson believed that the government who governs the least govern best, and this was a view that Thomas Jefferson shared with him. So they had some similarities. Now, as president, he automatically comes into trouble because in 1828 we have what becomes known as the Tariff of Abomination in 1828. This is a chart that shows the tariffs, and recall tariffs are taxes on goods coming from foreign countries. And notice the tariff of 1828 more or less here, right there, the Tariff of Abomination. is the highest tariffs in U.S. history ever. So this was the first major issue that Jackson had to deal with. Congress had voted to increase tariffs to protect northern manufacturers. And here's a chart to kind of explain how tariffs work. So let's assume this is the cost of manufacturing a shirt. And the country that's dealing with the U.S., that's battling with the U.S., is Britain. So in Britain, since they were more advanced in terms of the Industrial Revolution, let's say that the cost of manufacturing a shirt is $4. Let's say in the U.S., that same shirt, the same quality, costed $4.25 because it would take a little bit longer. Now, if you are a poor Southerner, you're gonna buy the British shirt for $4 because you're trying to save as every single cent you possibly can. The northern manufacturers realized that their shirts were not being sold because everybody was buying British goods. So northern companies asked Congress to establish a tariff. Again, tariffs are taxes on imported goods. Congress did so. So let's just assume they put a 25 tariffs on goods coming from Britain. So now they have to add $1 to that same shirt. So at the end of it, Americans now had a choice to pay the British shirt for $5 after the tariff, or to buy the northern manufactured shirt for $4.25. And so now people were buying the goods that were from the north. But the South did not like this because initially they were paying $4. And now by buying northern goods, they were paying an extra 25 cents. So we see that the South did not like what the North was doing. Here's another sketch that kind of shows you this. Tariffs are meant to protect U.S. manufacturers from foreign competition. That's the British good coming into the U.S. at 25% tariff. It's $5 in the U.S. This British good and the American good was $4. So Southerners fiercely hated tariffs. To the South, the North was getting rich at the expense of the South. So we have what becomes known as the nullification crisis of 1832. Notice the main state here is South Carolina. South Carolina refused to pay the tariff of 1828 and then again the tariff that Congress imposed on 1832. South Carolina held a state convention where they adopted the Ordinance of Nullification, declaring the tariff of 1828 and 1832 null and void. Furthermore, South Carolina threatened secession if federal troops tried to collect the tariffs. Calhoun, who was vice president to Andrew Jackson and who was from South Carolina, argued that if Congress was willing to impose tariffs on the South, then Congress would also try to abolish slavery, ruining the Southern economy. Jackson saw this as a direct attack on his presidential powers, so he had Congress enact what becomes known as the Force Bill. The Force Bill allowed the president, Andrew Jackson, to force South Carolina to obey national laws and pay the tariffs. Now, South Carolina at this point was on the verge of breaking away from the United States, and Jackson began to prepare the army to invade South Carolina. At this point in 1832, the country was on the verge of civil war. Civil war was averted by Henry Clay in what becomes known as the Compromise of 1833. Henry Clay, who didn't like Andrew Jackson, said it's better to avoid war though. So in the Compromise of 1833, Henry Clay proposed that the tariffs would be reduced gradually for the next 8 years to the modest level of 20%, the way they were after the War of 1812. So in 1832, the tariffs were up to 50%. For the next 8 years, they were gradually going to go down to please Southerners like South Carolina and avoid secession. And because of the Compromise of 1833, war is avoided, at least for now. But this was the second issue that Andrew Jackson had to deal with.